What's up, guys? Welcome back to my YouTube channel, Jessi's Journey, or if you're new here, hello, welcome. I am so glad you're here. My name is Jessi. I am an American digital nomad who travels the world full-time for my job, and I post my adventures here on YouTube as well as some travel tips and tricks like this video here today. So if that's the type of content you like, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below so you get notified anytime I post in the future. Now, when it comes to teaching English abroad, there is a whole wide world of countries that you can teach in, and maybe you have an idea of a specific country you want to live in, but maybe you also just are clueless and don't know where to begin. So for today's video, I want to compare, two continents. I want to compare teaching English in Europe versus Asia. Now, one, I am very much so aware that there are other continents in the world. However, I have not lived for an extended period of time in those. Although I will say in the second half of 2019, I will be spending the majority of the year in South America. So maybe I'll have an updated video to talk about this topic then. However, I have only lived in Europe and in Asia, so these are the two I will be comparing today. I also feel like it's important to say I am very much aware within those two continents there are many different little countries with various nuances to them. So I will be talking in generalizations today about the countries within those continents. However, generally I have found that most of the points I will be talking about ring true throughout those various countries. But like I said, there are little nuances to each one, so this might not be the standard norm. So if you are looking for more information into a specific country that you think you would like to live in, I will leave a link down below to the International TEFL Academy. You can contact a representative there and they will be able to talk to you specifically about the country you're interested in. Okay, let's stop rambling and get into the video. Okay, I figured I'd start this video off with the main point being about money, because who doesn't love money? It's what everyone wants to talk about. We love the money. So when it comes to working in Europe versus Asia, I would say there's definitely a higher likelihood of you to make more money and save more money by living in Asia. Now, when I'm talking about teaching English in Asia, I'm going to mainly be talking about teaching in China, Japan, and South Korea, because those are big name countries with big companies that pay very well in it, and most people who have reached out to me about teaching English within Asia, those are the countries they're considering or have heard the most about. However, there are also countries, I lived in Thailand and Vietnam and had experiences there that were great. And while they might not pay quite as much, they are comparable to cost of living. So you can save essentially the same percentage of your paycheck that you would within bigger countries within Asia, like China, South Korea, Japan. You can save the same percentage of your income. However, just general paycheck wise, it might not be quite as high. And then comparing that to Europe, the percentage of money that you'd be able to save is significantly lower to all of those countries within Asia. Does that make sense? Did I explain that well? Let's talk about it a little more and hopefully create some more clarity. So after I'd lived in the Czech Republic for a year, I ultimately decided I wanted to experience life living in Asia. I'd lived for a year in Europe and I loved it, and I was ready to push myself into the next phase of life, get outside of my comfort zone and explore Asia. So I started sending out applications and ultimately I got an offer at this school in Korea, which seemed great. Now, if you've been following my channel for a while, you'll know I never moved to South Korea, so ultimately I didn't accept the job, and I'll explain why later on in the video. However, I'm going to be using my contract that I had negotiated and ultimately didn't accept, but had negotiated and was ready to sign, to use some just general statistics for this video. So my contract in South Korea, there we go. There's so many different countries that have South something. South America, South Africa. South America's not a country, it's a continent. You get what I'm trying to say. Anyways, I'm gonna stop talking. So when I got my contract offer for South Korea, I was offered about $2,200 a month. Now, I would say for an ESL teacher, just a standard ESL teacher, I was going to be paid a little bit more because I had a year of experience teaching within Prague. So if you are brand new, just got certified, I would expect your income to be a little bit lower. You can Google general stats and see what income is like for your experience. However, I was going to be making about $2,200 a month. When I was living in the Czech Republic, I was making about $1,200 a month teaching at my public school. Now, by all means, that paycheck, while by American standard might not seem like that much, it was definitely able to cover my expenses. Living in the Czech Republic, it was very comparable to cost of living. And I guess in some ways you have to take that into consideration when it comes to the paycheck within South Korea, where I was offered. Cost of living was going to be significantly higher. So obviously I needed to make more money to cover those expenses. However, ultimately, I would be able to save a bigger percentage of money from my South Korea paycheck than I would from my Czech Republic contract. Generally, I would say I was able to save about $100 a month living in the Czech Republic. But also, if you watch my budgeting video where I talked about what my bare minimum budget I need to make as a digital nomad to afford my lifestyle, I did mention, I'll link that on screen by the way, but I did mention I was really bad with managing my money in the Czech Republic, and that's definitely something with time I've learned and grown in and become more of an adult in, and I was definitely not adulting well in the Czech Republic. So I maybe could have saved a little more. However, honestly, in South Korea, I could probably save the majority of that paycheck. Which brings me into point number 2, because you might be wondering, how the heck could you save your entire paycheck essentially? And that is because of the benefits that come with a contract in South Korea, or not South Korea, in Asia versus Europe. Now, of course, every contract, no matter where you are going to be, is going to have its own little differences. So this is definitely something to take into consideration when negotiating a contract abroad. However, overall, most Asian contracts provide that's not even close to correct English, a higher quantity of benefits to them than Europe does. Now, I'm not going to discuss health insurance within this benefit category. I had amazing health insurance, which was actually required for my visa to have. But also, now that I'm a 26-year-old American not on my mom's health insurance and have had to figure out how to do the marketplace by myself as a freelancer, let me tell you, insurance anywhere is going to seem better than what it is here. But because I was a freelancer when I was living in Asia, I don't really know exactly what insurance would be like for the contract there. However, I do know mine was included within my contract when I was going to be living in Asia as well. But I'm not going to talk about that because I don't really know too much about the topic. And also, insurance is just hella confusing, so I don't want to try to even attempt to talk about it. But the big things I want to talk about are, for the benefits, are flights and housing. So when it comes to living in Asia, because it's farther away, a lot of countries will pay for your flight to and from at the end of your contract cycle to your host country or from your host country. So my cost to move from America, small town Pennsylvania, where I grew up in, to South Korea was going to be covered by my company. And once my year-long contract had ended, I would have been flown back at the expense of the company as well. Now, I do believe had I terminated my contract and not fully gone through it, I would have had to pay back that money and covered my own flights home. But generally, don't sign a contract if you're not going to be able to stay. However, when it comes to living in Europe, you usually don't have those expenses covered for you, which I'll talk about in the next point as to why that's not a thing. But definitely something to keep in mind. I also negotiated in my South Korea contract to have one flight home a year covered. So their season cycles, I wasn't going to have Christmas time off, but I was going to have most of January off, and so I was going to be able to come home during that period, and so they were going to cover my flights to and from had I accepted that contract. So definitely something to consider negotiating for. But another big thing, and probably like the biggest selling point, I would say, to accepting a contract within the big Asian countries that pay very well, like I've talked about, Korea, China, Japan, those ones, is that they generally will cover your housing expense or provide an additional housing stipend to your salary. And this is not a thing in Europe. When you think about the logistics of this, rent is generally the most expensive portion of somebody's budget, rent or mortgage payments. And the company that I was going to be working for, and the majority of companies within Asia, provide that for you. So if they aren't already providing a housing location and you are going to be going apartment searching when you get there, they generally provide a stipend and say, like, this is how much you have allotted from us to pay for your housing. If you want to stay in like a fancy penthouse suite somewhere like really rich people, you'll have to pay the additional cost, but generally you can cover your rent with that money. And I honestly think it's even better if they can provide the location for you. It's usually close to your school. Where I was going to be at, the other teachers from the school that I'd be teaching in, also in that general area, so I would have friends if I had gotten to know them, and stuff like that. And so that's how you're able to save so much of your paycheck living in Asia, because you don't have that big expense. You just have to pay for utilities, food, and fun, essentially. And so that's how you'd be able to save most of your paycheck. Whereas living in Europe, I have yet to hear from somebody who has been able to get, I contradict myself. So I've been in the process of interviewing for an international school within Macedonia. However, this is a little bit different. If I get the job and accept that job and move full-time to Macedonia, which, I mean, we could post like 20 videos as to making that decision about my life, if I need to do that right now or not. Then they actually provide an additional housing budget. They don't provide the housing, but they provide extra money for my rent. However, that is an international school, which is something to also, I guess, kind of point out. If you are a licensed stateside teacher, not just a TEFL certified teacher or somebody with multiple years of experience, looking into an international school is definitely a different route to go when it comes to teaching ASL or teaching topical skills within the school set. They generally tend to pay by the American or British standard, and it's more like an American school just relocated to a different country. Usually there are more expat kids instead of local kids, so I'm kind of taking a tangent here, but like I was saying, that one offers a budget stipend, so I would assume there's probably other places similar to that, but when it comes to like public schools, tutoring schools, language schools within Europe, definitely not a thing that they'll pay for your housing. So that goes back to point number one, why you really can't save as much money in Europe as you can in Asia. Okay, let's talk about the interview process. Obviously, I am an American, and it's a lot harder, I suppose, to get to Asia than it is to get to Europe. I mean, both are pretty hefty flights. However, flying to Asia is a lot. I've done it, and I pray that one day teleportation will be a thing, because the idea of flying for 24 hours ever again is painful inside, but I know I'll do it because I want to go back. But it takes a lot to get there. So because of that, a lot of interviews are done via Skype, and there are really no in-person interviews. Now, of course, there are pros and cons to this. There's pros because you go to a country, they sponsor your work visa, they take care of the paperwork for you. You arrive in the country knowing you have everything set up, you have a job, you'll be making money, and your visa's taken care of. And that is great. But then also there is potential that it can be a scam, that maybe it's not necessarily exactly how it was described on the website. You don't know what the people are like, the children are like, the actual working conditions are like. I have seen many posts on these international expat groups that I am in on Facebook, from people who are like, help, I got scammed, I am now in China, I don't have a visa, the school doesn't exist, I showed up at the address and the woman has my passport information and like my private details, and I don't know what to do. So you definitely have to be aware of that. Even if you're doing in-person interviews, make sure you do a lot of research on the company to make sure it is actually a school. But yeah, like I said, pros and cons to both. Use your instinct with that scenario. But yeah, definitely a pro. You know going into it, you have a job. Whereas with Europe, most places you do your interviews in person, which requires you then to already have your visa. So that ties back into the benefits of how they don't typically provide your visas. So you have to go to a country, at least start the process of getting your visa. So when I started working for my public school, I hadn't received my visa fully yet. And they just withheld my pay for 2 months, and then I got a really big paycheck my first month, once I got my first paycheck cycle once I got my visa. But you at least have to be there in the process of getting your visa or already having it to interview at companies and be considered for the job. Now there are a couple places, I will put it out there, that you can teach English on a student visa and just get paid under the table, or some places that don't do it necessarily the most legal way. However, I do not encourage that on my channel. Do things legally. It makes your life a lot easier and a lot less stressful. So you just put that out there. But I mean, just things to consider. So up until this point of the video, I would say generally, when it comes to comparing pros and cons, there seems like there are more pros towards working in Asia versus working in Europe. However, this next piece is actually what ultimately sold me when I first was looking to move abroad to go to Europe versus Asia, and then when I was looking into my contract with South Korea to ultimately decide not to sign it and go with teaching English online full-time instead. And that is the work-life balance within the two countries. Now, as an American, I guess there is a standard for full-time work that you work 40 hours a week plus time and a half for overtime should you work it. When I first graduated from college, the job I accepted was I was working about maybe like 50 to 60 hours a week, and it was a lot. I would wake up early in the morning, go to work all day, get home, cook dinner, shower, be so exhausted, and go to sleep knowing I was going to do the next thing the next day. And I did that Monday through Friday and then some Saturdays during the month as well. And it was, like I said, it was a lot. I literally felt like all I was doing was working to make it to working. There's that famous song that's like, everybody's working for the weekend. And I didn't even have a freaking weekend to work for because I was working on the weekend as well. And so literally my whole life and my whole identity was work and my job, and it was exhausting and ultimately what caused me to burn out. And then I guess in a good way, make me find the opportunity to move abroad, thus causing the whole adventure to begin. So I guess I can be thankful for it, but also at the same time, it still really like steams my clams that this is like things that people still do and don't understand how unhealthy it is. And so when I moved to Europe, I was pleasantly surprised to discover that full-time generally is actually about 25 to 30 hours a week. Now, I did have friends living in the Czech Republic who worked at the international school, and they worked by the American standards, so they had longer hours. But for me in a public school, I worked about 25 hours a week. I actually had an amazing schedule. I negotiated it when I was interviewing. And so on Mondays, depending on the day, I worked either at 2 or 3 p.m. till 5. So I worked like not even a half day. I worked all day, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then I had off on Fridays. So I had like basically 4-day weekends to go adventure and explore and invest in myself and do things that I wanted to do and learn new skills and meet new people and travel. And it was amazing. It was like the first time in my life that I realized my life wasn't all about work. I was working so that I could make money to invest in myself, not working to make money to just make money and to keep working. And I would say basically everybody I've talked to in different countries throughout Europe and the research I've read online, this is pretty standard and pretty normal. Now, of course, I could have picked up extra shifts and worked more and made more money, thus throwing off my first point about making money. Maybe I could have made more, maybe I could have saved more. However, I realized by going with what was more culturally acceptable and culturally normal when it comes to the hours I was working, I was going to have such a healthier life. So when I got my contract for South Korea and saw that I was going to be working Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. with of course some breaks in between for food and whatnot, and then 2 Saturdays a month for half days, I was scared, devastated. I don't want to sound lazy, but I realized I don't think I could even physically do that anymore, because I've just gotten so used to this new way of life, this new norm. And that doesn't mean I don't have a work ethic, and that doesn't mean I don't work hard, but I didn't want my life to get back in this bubble of just working all day for no purpose. And yes, I would be able to explore the country I was living in more, in the city and town I was in, but I've had so many friends who lived in Asia and taught in Asia and came back and they said, I didn't get to see like 90% of the things I wanted to see or do 90% of the things I wanted to do because all I was doing was working, and that terrified me and ultimately led me to the decisions to teach English online. Because now I teach about 25 to 30 hours a week, and I get to do fun things while I'm traveling and exploring, and I get to, right now I'm taking an art class because I have hours that I can go twice a week and take an art class because I'm not just like working all day every day. And I think this is ultimately definitely something you need to take into consideration when you're comparing the two, especially because most people who teach English abroad for a year or 2 years want to travel and want to explore while they're doing it. And yes, there are public holidays in both countries that you can have time off to go and explore. However, generally living in Europe, because of the work-life balance and the lesser hours that you have to work to be considered full-time, I would definitely say you can do more adventuring on the side as a full-time ESL teacher. Alrighty guys, that's all I have for you today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a big thumbs up, share it with your friends, family, strangers, you know the whole drill. And as always, I will see you next week for another video. Bye guys!